Hello, Internet, YouTube. I'm here to drop hot takes on UFC 252's main event, the Trilogy fight between Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. And long story short, I take no credit away from Daniel Cormier. Absolutely, he could win. But if you were asking me to pick a winner, I take Stipe easy every single time for the following reasons. Firstly, I am of the camp of people who get the sense that the first fight saw the knockout for DC due in some part to Stipe being compromised from his previous bout with Francis Ngannou. If you go and rewatch Miocic versus Ngannou, I did yesterday, I have to admit that he absorbed significantly fewer shots than I had recalled. I believe in the first round, Ngannou landed something like a total of maybe something in the order of 17 to 20 strikes. And of course, Ngannou being what he is, probably all of them were significant strikes. But in all reality, in my rewatching of it, I would say more like something in the order of like 10 of those strikes really seemed significant. And at the time, the mystique of Ngannou was still so strong. So to see Stipe absorb those shots in the moment and in the weeks following that fight, it seemed really quite incredible. And it was very easy to buy into the notion that Stipe was compromised going into the DC fight. So there is that little notion. If you happen to rewatch Stipe and DC's first fight, compromised or not, you would observe not long before the knockout, the eventual finish by DC, that DC poked Stipe in the eye. And it so happens that he poked him in the eye on the same side where he ultimately landed that knockout shot. So I'm not going to sit here and say that really accounts for anything that's significant, but it's noteworthy. At least, if nothing else, it's noteworthy because it's real. It really happened. You can go watch and see it happen. Stipe takes the eye poke. The referee pauses the fight, tells DC to keep his fingers in, which he proceeds to not do and hadn't been doing all along. And then, if I recall correctly, it's within 60 seconds of that eye poke that the finish comes. It's not long after. So that's something interesting to think about as well. If you jump forward then to the second match between DC and Stipe, interestingly enough, there's also some eye pokery going on. Which is not really that surprising, and it won't be surprising if there's eye pokery in the third match, because in order to deal with the height and the reach of Stipe, DC is having to put his fingers out. He's doing a ton of hand fighting. to reach back into the first bout one more time, just briefly, it's also worth noting that the fight was relatively close to that point. They were trading shots. It's hardly a blowout. So then you jump forward to the second fight, and in the first round, DC has a lot of success, but much of that success is built on him securing a takedown and holding dominant position for probably half or so of the round. It's a not insignificant amount of time. But he also does not get off a ton of damage while he has that position. So the optics of it, maybe, or on paper, it would be easy in the second fight to say that DC somehow dominated the first round or was really, really clearly the victor. For sure, it's 10-9 DC. There's no arguing that. But it's hardly any kind of a blowout. If you go back and watch, DC definitely wins the round. He's got the control time. But in terms of damage done, not so radically significant. A 10-point must system requires that you give DC 10 for sure. But not a damaging blowout kind of round. He wins the round with control more so than damage. Then you head to round 2 of that fight, and you see a much closer results. Without the takedown for DC, they're strictly on the feet. Stipe is able to start landing some significant shots. And DC is landing significant shots as well, but this is where the whole Ngannou effect really starts, in my mind, to show up, because as DC is landing those big shots, Stipe is not going anywhere. And you can even see it on DC's face a little bit, that he starts to wonder, like, how come, like, I'm hitting this guy cleaner than I hit him in the first fight, and he's not going anywhere. You can see it on DC's face. Somewhere about half or a third of the way through that second round, he's thinking, like, uh-oh, like, this guy's not going anywhere. And, of course, Stipe is landing his share of significant strikes. And to reach back into that first round again as well, when DC is in top position, the dominant position on the ground, and he does get off maybe like 3 pretty solid ground and pound shots, Stipe also, while he's on his back, lands, I think it's about 2, maybe there's 3 like pretty good elbows off the back. So just saying. But in the second round, Stipe starts to land pretty solid. He starts to really connect while they're up on the feet. And if you need any evidence for the fact that, was taking a toll or counts for something, after the second round, DC is in his corner and he's asking if he's losing the fight, which, if you're clear and coherent, you're not going to sit there and ask a question like that. Think about, like, in the case of Gaethje Ferguson, Gaethje was not sitting in his corner going, oh, am I losing? It was, no. He walks back to his corner screaming, God damn, this is fun, because he knows he's piecing him up. So after the second round, DC is questioning. DC, practically already has lost the fight, right? He's asking if he's losing. And he knows that his power shots are not working, and he's now feeling the power of Stipe, and he's thinking, oh boy. Third round, all told, similar outcome. It's relatively even in terms of effectiveness of striking on the feet, in terms of like volume. They're both landing plenty. But again, DC is thinking that he's landing these finishing shots. He thinks he's landing these super clean shots that are going to put Stipe away. They're not putting Stipe away. Stipe is landing clean shots. I don't know whether Stipe is thinking to himself, I can't believe this guy's still here or not. But, and of course, also Stipe does score a takedown, which at the end of the round, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of the third round, things kind of wrap up with DC hoping to secure his own takedown just to kind of even the scorecards as far as that takedown goes. Which again sort of just does feel like, if you really think you're ahead on rounds, for sure, you're maybe not quite so worried about just scoring a takedown for the sake of scoring a takedown. But I digress. At the time, the commentary team is thinking probably 3-0 for DC anyhow, which would not be unfair. Again, 10-point must scoring. You could maybe make that claim. But then, of course, we get to the fourth round, and at approximately 3:06 of the fourth round, Stipe finally figures out that with DC's hands up in the air and his fingers poking all over into his eyes, that means the body is wide open. At about 3:06, Stipe lands that first left hook to the body and proceeds to land clean as can be at least 13 more. If you count some of the more glancing body shots or some of the less obvious ones, the count is maybe somewhere more like 15, even towards 16. He certainly lands at least 13 of them clean as can be over the course of the next 2 minutes, which ultimately leads to the finish. And it's not necessarily fair to say that the first fight is fluky or that it's somehow not legitimate just because it's fast. A first round knockout is a first round knockout, and it is what it is. That said, right, in this sport, even the first round knockouts where we would never even question it, it's just that whole thing about a puncher's chance or the lucky shot, not to invoke the word luck there, but it says something, if we're talking about who's a better fighter. And maybe that's not even that fair of a question, I guess, but there's something to be said about the fact that when DC wins, it had to happen in that first round. And that when Stipe wins, it was over the course of time. It was into the fourth round. And even rather near the end of the fourth round. So if we want to make the case for DC, maybe it has to be that if he can't land a clean shot right away, then the odds are really not in his favor. Which again, then I personally am a little bit inclined to go to the Ngannou scenario of, if Stipe's chin is not compromised, DC doesn't have the power to put him away with one clean shot. If he can land a number of shots, maybe his odds go up. But as we saw in the second match, Stipe's chin, when it's at full strength, can absorb at least 3 or so rounds of some of DC's cleanest shots that he's ever landed on anybody. So in the composite, it feels like a pretty easy call to give an edge to Stipe in terms of who's going to win that bout. The advantages physically that allowed him to make adjustments technically to win that second fight are still going to be there. He still has the height advantage. He still has that reach advantage. DC's going to have to poke him in the eyes and reach up into the sky to do that same hand fighting game in order to implement the game plan that he was being very successful with in both fights. But if he's going to do that kind of hand fighting, both of them are going to know that body shot is there. And if DC and his team can find some kind of way to effectively negate that body shot without opening up the head, then certainly I give them better odds. But DC's corner at the end of the third round was screaming, "Keep your damn hands up." And he kept his hands up, and it opened up the body shot in a big, big way. So that is something of interest to watch for and to see unfold and see how it all plays out in the Trilogy match. So that's my opinion and perspective and my hot take on it all. If you've got any insights, contrarian opinions, drop them. Otherwise, we'll see what unfolds in the main event, UFC 252. Ciao, YouTube.